Welcome to the Online SuperCoach podcast. Today we have Darryl Stickel here with us, and he has a PhD from Duke University on building trust in hostile environments. So, Darryl, welcome. Welcome to the Online SuperCoach podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I like to start off asking if you have like a phrase or a mantra that something that speaks to you, that motivates you, if you have something you'd like to share.
Yeah, it's a quote from Jack Dempsey.
Oh,
Um,
great.
a champion is someone who gets back up when they can't.
Oh, that's great. That's
Yeah,
that's a great one. A champion is someone who gets back up when they can't. That's a very, very good one. That's a great one. I like it a lot. Jack Dempsey.
yeah.
That's really cool. Why you pick that? You
I've been knocked around a lot. Uh,
that's
I've been knocked down a few times.
yeah, yeah. Well, there's like a Rocky Balboa quote that's fairly similar. I'm sure he pulled from Jack. Maybe that's where he got it from. It was the same concept. It doesn't matter how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So I'm glad to have you on. I'm a really big on leadership. I was an Eagle Scout, and I feel like that's been a major part of my life. You know, and everywhere I've gone, I've tried to just try to step up and where there was a void, I guess. Whenever there's a void in leadership, I've tried to, have done that. Whether it
Right.
was in teaching or in all my different roles and all my businesses, obviously. So I'm really big on that, and I coach that a lot. So I get that's something that's interesting to me, I guess. So you're really curious to hear, exactly what you're talking about, because obviously, it's essential to have trust if you're going to be in any type of leadership role, because if there's no trust there, then there's obviously you're not going to be effective. So I'm really interested in hearing about how all your studies and what you've been able to do in your life with all of this. So
Yeah.
if you start from like what got you in that mindset in the first place.
Well, I think, yeah, I want to acknowledge the point that you just made, how important trust is, and so critical for your listeners. You said your listeners tend to be uh, instructors and therapists and uh, coaches for people who are trying to get fit,
Yep,
uh, online health advocates and those kinds of things. There's a
exactly.
lot of noise in the system, right? There's a lot of people talking about a lot of different things, and they need their customers to trust them. They need the people that they're working with to actually do the exercises that they're suggesting for them. Those people are investing time, energy, resources, their money into those lessons, and they're pushing themselves hard, right, to
Yeah.
reach gains. And so they actually need to believe that the person leading them through that process is somebody that they should listen to. And so I think trust is actually a really critical element for your audience as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. You're exactly right. That this space is gets saturated by the day. There's more and more trainers involved in space. And why would they pick one person over another? It's obviously that they feel comfortable with this guy. They feel they or the a woman. So it's the trust factor, of course.
Huge element. And so for me, when I started thinking about trust, I had experienced some trauma in my life when I was a young man, when I was about 17. Um, I was a hockey player. I got jumped by a fan with a club. Um, and oddly enough, it provoked this sense of empathy in me for people who were struggling, trying to make
Right.
their lives better. And so for some reason, I would be sitting on the bus and someone would come and sit down next to me and say, I'm really having a hard time. And I wanted to understand why that was happening, because it wasn't happening to everybody else. And I thought, if this is going to keep happening to me, maybe I should get paid for this. So
Yeah.
I started down a path towards becoming a clinical psychologist. And I was working with families in crisis and troubled teens and all kinds of different populations. And I started developing these insights about how to connect with them and how to get them to engage both with me and with others in a way that was productive and helpful for them. And so I ended up working in, I did my master's degree in public administration. I ended up working in native land claims. And they would ask me these deep philosophical questions like, what is self-government? Or what will the province look like 50 years after claims are settled? And the last question they asked me was, how do we convince a group of people we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? And I thought, man, that's a good question. Um, and so I went to Duke and wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments. And when I finished, I had a couple of academic options, but McKinsey and Company is a big management consulting firm, came along and offered me a big signing bonus and the chance to move back to Canada, which I was, interested in doing. And they discovered that I had really good client hands, so they would send me to the worst places possible.
Yeah.
And so,
It's
you know, I'd,
reward.
yeah, exactly. Congratulations, you're good at dealing with difficult people. You're going to deal with difficult people.
Yeah.
And so, um, so I would find myself in places where there'd been strikes or where clients didn't really want us to be there or those kinds of things. And I was getting a chance to apply these things, these concepts. And
From
then
your
I was in,
thesis, like from your studies, basically. So it's like
yeah,
you're being like putting it into action, essentially. It's
yeah,
theorized. Yeah.
yeah. So I took all that theory crap that I'd developed and started actually doing something with it.
Yeah.
And the learning curve was amazing. Um, Now all of a sudden I'm coming to understand certain things and how things work and how to explain it to people in a way that makes sense. And then I get hurt. I get injured in a car accident on the way to a client site,
Oh, geez.
end up with post-concussion syndrome, and I just can't pull those hours anymore, right? So I can't work 80 hours a week anymore like I was. And so now I'm, a bit lost again. And then one of my buddies comes along and says, hey, just come talk to us. He's running the strategy for this mutual fund company. And so I end up working with this mutual fund company and I develop a workshop on my thesis, right, based on my model. And, initially they'd ask me about sustainable competitive advantage. How do we get an advantage over our competitors? And I said, well, that means you do something they can't do that they can't copy. And you don't do anything I can't copy. Like I could buy one share of every fund you have, and now I know how they're all built.
Right.
So I could sell what you sell at a discount because I don't have to pay the fund advisor.
Yeah.
And so they said, oh, well, what the hell do we do? I said, you build strong, deep relationships with your customers. And they said, that's it. That's our strategy. And so I spent 18 months developing the workshop and training all of them. And again, learning curve is just incredible, right? Because I'm figuring out how to explain this to people who are trying to sell mutual funds. And at the end of 18 months, they hired a professional survey firm, found out that trust was the primary driver of the sales decision, that they were dramatically more trusted than any of their competitors.
Wow.
And they generated 75 cents of every new dollar that came into the industry for the next 2 years. And so they went from being middle of the pack to dominant in the space of 18 months. And I knew from that what I had wasn't perfect, but it worked.
Yeah.
And so I started applying it to nonprofits, to public sector, private sector, to families. Um, I did some work with the Canadian military, trying to help them figure out how to build trust with the locals in Afghanistan. And the whole time I'm learning, right? Like the learning, I still, it's 20 years later, I still learn so much every time I apply this stuff, which is one of the things that sort of separates me from most of I've got this mix of deep theoretical knowledge and this practical applied experience that allows me to talk to people and
Yeah.
help them understand this stuff. So that's kind of the journey that I went through.
Wow. That's a lot of really great stuff there that definitely it resonates with me, especially the still learning part, because I was just talking with one of my clients yesterday and he was like, without revealing too much, but like he, he was trying to find the finality of, okay, so then is that it? Or is that when will we be able to do this? I'm like, it's not so finite, all of this whole process. Like once you get to there, there's going to be something else to do, and then it's going to continue to grow. So you're racing to get to the end of where you think you have to be, but whenever you get to that point, there's going to be more that's going to develop in your business and other things you need to do. So it's just never ending, you know. So
Yeah.
he was a young kid, and very ambitious, very like hungry. Um, but so I feel like you got to just it's whenever even if you have all that done and your business is at that maturation point and all that knowledge, there's going to be the next chapter of something else that you have to learn and evolve into. So
Yeah.
the still learning thing I think is really really pertinent. I did have a question though. So like how were they able to do that assessment? So you said that they did this some kind of evaluate like a survey or something that said
Yeah.
more trustworthy. How would they even how would
So
they
it was
do that?
it was a professional survey firm called Ipsos Reid, and they started asking a bunch of questions about what was it that made people decide which product to buy. And they found out that trust was the primary driver, right? That most people would think, oh, it's performance, but you can't predict future performance for financial services,
Right.
right? Because if you could, then everyone would buy the same one. Um, Instead, it was about how do I show up and what do I look like? And how do I engage with you, both when things are going well and when things are not going well? And then they asked their clients. So they asked, the folks that mutual funds sell to are mostly financial advisors. And so they surveyed the financial advisors to say, rank, you know, which one of these do you trust the most?
Yeah.
And or how much do you trust these different mutual fund companies? And I think it was a 7-point scale, and they came back as ranked, in the sixes, and their closest competitor was ranked in the fours.
Wow.
So, um,
That's pretty
yeah,
good to be in the sixes out of seven for funds, like a mutual fund.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, that's crazy.
it was amazing. And so if we think about how do we do that, right? How do we actually get people to trust us, right? To be more comfortable making that decision, whether it's trying out our training program or launching a new training program, creating new products. How do we get them comfortable?
Yeah. Yeah. That was like my next question. Like what did that company do what did they in the 18, I think you said it was an 18-month time period where this, that you're working with. How did what were they able to implement to be able to build up that kind of trust? I wonder how much is applicable, across
Right. Yeah. So it took 18 months because I was developing the workshop.
as you,
Um, but it takes a lot less time than that now. I've been able to hone it and make it a lot more efficient.
yeah.
But really, what it amounts to is understanding how does trust work, what is it, and then how do we take steps to build it. And so, for me, trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. And so the definition for trust is it's the willingness to be vulnerable when you could choose to do otherwise. So choosing to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. So I'm
Gotcha.
going to
Vulnerable. I understand.
yeah, so it's a willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely predict someone else's behavior, right? And there's elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in that definition. And so when we're deciding whether to trust someone, we ask ourselves two fundamental questions. The first is, how likely am I to be harmed, which is perceived uncertainty. The second is, if I'm harmed, how bad is it going to hurt, which is perceived vulnerability. And those multiply together to give us a level of perceived risk. And we each have a threshold of risk that we're comfortable with. If we go beyond that threshold, then we don't trust. If we're beneath it, then we do. And so building trust becomes fairly simple. It's where does uncertainty come from and how do I take steps to reduce it? And where does vulnerability come from and how do I take steps to help the other person manage that? And so what I did with the mutual fund company and what I do with all my clients is I talk through here's what uncertainty is, here's how it works. And it comes from two places. It comes from us as individuals, and it comes from the context that we're embedded in. And so, there's levers that we can pull to build trust with other folks. Now, we all have the ability to build trust. Some are just better than others,
Yeah.
right? And so those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull, and they pull it over and over again. Usually it's the ability lever. I have these kinds of credentials, this sort of background, this much experience, this many clients. That's the ability lever, and it's our favorite, and it's one of the ones that's easier for us to pull. There's those who are better at building trust have multiple levers that they pull. And those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one.
Right.
So I think there are 10 levers, and I list them all in my book and in my masterclass and in the courses that I teach. The levers for the individual, for us as individuals, are benevolence, integrity, and ability. So benevolence is the belief you've got my best interest at heart and that you'll act in my best interest, even if it's not in your own short-term best interest. Integrity is, do I follow through on my values? So do my actions line up with the values that I express? And do I follow up on my commitments? Do I actually fulfill the promises that I make? And the last one is ability. Do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? Now, the other element of uncertainty is the context. And it's, how am I constrained? What am I allowed to do? What am I not allowed to do? And there are formal and informal elements to that. And so we can reduce people's uncertainty. Those are 4 levers I've just described, right?
Yep.
We can show them benevolence, we can show integrity, we can show ability, or we can help explain our context or constrain our context so it reduces uncertainty for the other person. One of the challenges that the mutual fund company had was that their sales guys were all flogging product, right? My fund's the best. Oh, buy this fund. It's awesome. And they weren't showing benevolence or
Yeah.
integrity, right? And so I said to them, you've got the wrong perspective. You've got, 10% of a client's assets, you're trying to get to 11. Well, what if instead of trying to get to 11%, you tried to double the client's assets under management, their book? Because 10% of twice as much is twice as much. So what if your perspective was to turn your clients into monsters, right? Just to help them be world beaters.
Yeah.
And they kind of went, okay, well, will people actually pay us for that? I said, you wait and see, and when you're helping your clients develop their own pitch, help them figure out how to segment their clients to figure out what offerings to give them. Much like your coaches are going to have different clientele at different points, right?
Yeah.
And so you segment your clients into what offerings you think they need. And sometimes if you think somebody else has a better product than you, say that. Say, here's 5 options for this segment of the market. We have a product that fits in there, but I actually think these other folks are better than us right now.
Yeah.
And that starts to show that you have the best interest of the other person at heart. So they went from flogging product to trying to help their customers become profoundly successful.
So by essentially one of the tactics for the benevolence is doing like that Macy's gimbal thing by sending them across the street.
Exactly, right? And so for your audience, it might be, oh, you want to work on your abs? That's not where I focus.
Yeah.
But I've seen a really good product for that. And here's who I would recommend.
Yeah.
Or, you're trying to recover after a certain illness. I don't know that really well. I would love to help you, but I
Yeah.
know
Let me
this
refer
other
you to
person,
somebody else. Yeah.
right? So I've had experience with a number of kinesiologists and physiotherapists because of the injuries that I've sustained. And I know that there's different levels of skill. And I had one guy come to work with me, and he had to be 350 pounds. And he said, "Oh, all got washboard abs underneath. It's just, sometimes we have fat that covers it up." And I said, "Yeah, that's why those guys in Auschwitz were so ripped."
Yeah.
Um, and I said, I've got post-concussion syndrome. Have you done any work with folks like that? Because I have problems with vertigo, and if I get too fatigued, my brain stops being able to function properly, and I'll fall on the ground.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, "Oh, it's all the same." And I kind of went, "You're not the guy for me."
Right.
Right? Because he didn't get it, and he wasn't interested in my best interest. Um, and so being able to show some benevolence, being able to show integrity, saying, this is where I want you to get to, and this is why this is a passion for me. I like to help people. Here's why. So being able to pull those other levers starts to reduce uncertainty for other folks.
The
And you
fourth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
go
I
ahead,
didn't mean to.
go
No, no.
ahead.
The fourth lever I wanted you to, so I totally understand, the ability, integrity, and but benevolence. But the fourth lever, if you could explain that one,
The context.
the context. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are formal and informal mechanisms of social control, right? Rules of the game, right? So you're living in New York. There are formal rules that constrain your behavior living in New York, right? There's municipal guidelines, there's US laws, there's New York state laws.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of things that constrain your behavior. There's also informal things, right? Clubs that you belong to, groups that you ascribe to, beliefs that you have, the norms and values that you have, those also constrain your behavior. And as I come to get to know your situation better, I get a better understanding of you and what you might do, right? And the
Yeah.
example I use is a doctor's office.
Right.
We go into a doctor's office, they say, take off your clothes, and we do, right?
Right.
I've tried that in other places. It doesn't work.
Yeah, you try at
You know,
Starbucks, it's not gonna make sense. Yeah.
I'm in line at Starbucks and I say to the barista, "I'm a doctor, take off your clothes." Nothing, right? Well,
Yeah.
maybe a strange look or something, but there are times when we trust people without knowing
I
anything
understand
about
because of
them.
the context, because you're relating to their unique environmental situation, well, not just environmental situation, just in situation in general.
Right. And
I got
so, you go into a restaurant, you don't watch the cook make the food, right? You
Right.
believe that they're going to. Now, you go into a restaurant that's in a different country. Why does McDonald's succeed in other countries? Because it's familiar,
Yeah.
right? The context feels familiar for people who are going there who are traveling. But going to another restaurant, you're kind of unsure about what's on the menu, how they prepare it, whether you're going
Yeah.
to like it or not. And so context plays a huge role. And, we can explain our context to folks, but we can also sign contracts that constrain us,
Yeah.
right? We can put up a peace bond. We can make public commitments. These are all ways that we can constrain ourselves to reduce uncertainty for other folks. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That does make a lot of sense. Now, as far as the integrity part, I I'm all about integrity in everything I do. It's one
Right.
of the things we say here all the time is, I want to say what I do and I want to do what I say I'm going to do. Like that's like a major underpinning to any of my companies. But in a small window of, let's say, trying to capture new business, like
Right.
what are like some strategies to be able to you know showcase your integrity,
So there's a few things we can do, and I talk about how to pull these levers. There's a few things
in
that
the
we can
book.
do. So we can talk about what our values are and then tell stories about how we've acted on that in the past. So give examples. We can make small commitments early. And one of the things we want to do is start to create a pattern of behavior. So you say, I'm going to follow up with you in a week and just check in and see how you're doing and see if I can be helpful.
Right.
So in a week you follow up, right? So you make small commitments early. There's a couple places where we fall down, right? One is I make a promise to you and you hear something I didn't intend, right? We've got a miscommunication that occurs.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I followed through on my commitment, but you don't.
Right.
And all of this, all of this really depends, like, because I can think I have integrity and I can think I'm benevolent and I can think I have ability. But if you don't feel it, if the client doesn't feel it, it
Doesn't
doesn't
matter.
matter,
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
right? So one of the other things that I recommend is once I've finished following through on something, I say, remember when I said I was going to do this? This is me doing it.
Yeah.
And so that we've got a
Remind
shared
them. Almost like
understanding.
reminding them as you're doing it.
Yeah. So I told you I'd call you in a week. This is me calling you back. Um, so linking our behaviors and telling the story as we go, because people interpret the world through stories.
Right.
And if we don't engage with them and help co-create a story, then they'll create their own.
Yeah.
And it may not be the one we want. And it's the same with, when we make decisions or take actions, we should be able to tell a story that links that back to our values,
Yeah.
right? To say how this is consistent with the values that I have. Because otherwise people will interpret it through their own lens.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the small commitments, or early, I think that's applicable for like for us as trainers, because oftentimes, people start off with like a 2 week trial, a week trial, a month trial, whatever it is, 28-day challenge type of thing. And
Yeah,
during that time, as a coach, you're interacting with the client during that entire period. And every one of those interactions, it might be very prudent to say that, listen, I'm going to check up on you tomorrow if you don't send me a picture of your food that you eat or whatever, if you don't update
right,
your workout log, you know, and then when you follow through with that, it's just then reminding them that you're doing that. And it gives you that, that's what it is, a 28-day challenge or a week or two trial. That's exact. They are test driving this training experience out. And whether they get their your ability and that whether they are getting results or not, that's one thing. That's a
right,
whole other area. But at the end of the day, by you doing all those follow-ups and communicating with them and making sure you're doing exactly what you said you're going to do, you're going to be showcasing your integrity, and you're probably dragging some of the benevolence along the side with it,
right. Yeah. So, most of your audience is going to have plans for people,
Yeah.
right? For different phases of their development and growth.
Yeah.
So, how easy would it be for them to just say, this is the plan that's going to unfold. Here's the exercises we're going to
Yeah.
do. Here's what you're
The
going to
first week.
experience. Here's what you're going to feel. This is what normally happens for folks.
Yeah.
And then just coming back and saying, I told you that this is what you were going to experience. Is that pretty consistent with your experience?
Yeah.
You know, and this is the muscle group we're working on today, and this is how it's going to feel afterwards. So they have all kinds of opportunities to foreshadow
Yeah.
and then follow along and demonstrate integrity as they go along, right?
Yeah.
And so easy to predict your behavior. And it's just a good habit to get into so that we show integrity and pull that lever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's really, really, really great stuff. That's great stuff. So in your book, what was the title of the book again?
It's called Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. And there's a lot of people talking about the importance of trust, but few are talking about what to actually do about it. And that's what I try to do. A very practical, applied approach. I talk about there's a couple levers in vulnerability. If we think about your clients are investing with you to try to improve the product that they sell to other clients.
Right.
So their vulnerability is the money they spend, but also the time they spend and the concern they have about foregoing somebody else's expertise.
Right.
Their clients are thinking about, I want to be in better shape. I want to, and I want someone who's actually going to get me.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't
exactly
want to
right.
be, I don't want to be treated like another number. I don't want to be a faceless, part of a faceless mass. I
Yeah.
want someone to be aware of me and helping me try to improve my life.
Yeah.
Um, and so understanding that that's the vulnerability, allows us to take steps to reduce that perception of vulnerability, right? To say, okay, so here's what you're going to experience, and here's how it's going to feel, and this is what, the early steps are going to be like, and here's how it's going to progress for you, so that they aren't overestimating the level of vulnerability they're experiencing.
So the way I'm hearing it, a lot of these are really good sales tactics. I feel like a lot of this is applicable even in being able to make the transaction in the first place, right?
Yeah.
Because obviously you want to continue to develop the trust and as you're applying the services with your customers, but when you're talking to me, I'm just hearing like, you know what, this is really great to dial in on this during the sales process. Like during the sales process, you want to understand like where where the obstacles they might come up with, like, or you're just saying vulnerabilities, like where is their risk that they're taking, understand, where their risk is exactly, and trying to weigh it out, like how important it is for them, and then get ahead of the curve and try to almost break it down for them in a bit and make it a
Yeah.
little easier. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm.
Sales is a huge trust component to it,
Yeah.
right? And partly we think about what are steps we can take to reduce vulnerability. Well, some of your clients are already doing that, right? They're saying try it out for a week, take a 28-day
Yeah.
challenge, do a 2-week. So there's not this huge investment up front, right? So that they reduce the vulnerability of the other party. And we see that in you know uh, products with high return policies, or you go to the ice cream parlor, they let you do a little taster, right?
Yeah.
You're like, okay, so I'll try out that rum and raisin. Oh, hey, it turns out I hate rum and raisin.
Yeah.
Thank God I didn't get a whole bowl, right?
Right.
And all it cost me was trying to get that taste out of my mouth.
Right.
And so we're trying to figure out ways to reduce vulnerability so it makes it easier to make that first step. And then we need to be clamping down on uncertainty the whole time. And we're trying to have them get more and more comfortable with us. So we're continuing to show benevolence, we're continuing to show integrity, we're continuing to show ability. And partly you know, there's a couple of other levers in perceived outcomes, right? So we have uncertainty times vulnerability leads to perceived risk. That's the trust decision, that
Right.
comparison of risk versus our threshold. After our interaction, so I decide to join your 1-week trial or your 2-week trial, there's a perceived outcome. And we interpret the world through stories. So if I haven't prepared you to say, here's what success looks like, is going to look like
Yeah.
after 2 weeks, here's what you should expect, you're going to be a little bit hungrier
Yeah.
because you're putting out more energy.
It's yeah.
So you need to have snacks in the house that are healthy for you. So prepare for that. And you're going to experience, you might experience not weight loss, but a shift in your weight from one part of your body to another.
Right.
Um, and so we start to predict what a good outcome looks like. We start to co-create what a good outcome looks like with
Yeah,
the other
your
party.
appetite will likely increase. Like if someone increases their activity, their appetite's going to increase. So they're going to get worried, like, oh my God, I'm going to start gaining weight. Don't worry, that's because your metabolisms are now running a little quicker. So absolutely. So it's like getting ahead of it there. But again, I'll even bring it back to the sales again, because
Yeah.
it's kind of like future pacing. So like a lot, that's a big, you want to really sell them on what their future will look like, and what their lifestyle will look like, and what their body might look
Right.
like, in the future. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, a big part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the middle of all this, there's two more levers, and they are within our emotional states, whether we like or dislike somebody else. And it acts as a powerful filter. So for those we like, we tend to look for reasons to trust them. We're more likely to trust them. We see the outcomes more positively. For those we dislike, exactly the opposite.
Yeah,
And
those are two
and so
important ones.
yeah. And so for people who are, in really good shape, who are trainers, there's a fear from fat guys like me that you're going to look down on me and think less of me, right? Like this body doesn't just happen, buddy.
Like,
It takes years of neglect. There's been bad decisions made at various stages along the way.
well, so
And
some reasons, can't resist.
yeah, well, and for me, there's a challenge with exercise, right? Because of the
Yeah.
post-concussion stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's got to be very moderate pace and fatigue and all those kinds of things. So there's challenges that I face. Um, but if you can come alongside someone like me and say, "Hey, brother, I love and appreciate you. I want you to be healthier,"
Yeah.
instead of, "Wow, you fat tub of shit," you know, get your act together.
Yeah.
It has a huge impact
Yeah.
on how those people respond, right? So accepting people for where they are and valuing the fact that they want to get better, it can be really powerful.
So
We
in
like
your
people who
book,
like us.
so I'm sorry, excuse me. I was so excited to ask you the next question. So in your
Go
book,
ahead.
do you kind of go over like strategies for each of these 10 levers? Yeah.
I do, yeah. So I systematically go through the model. I lay out the 10 levers and explain them. And then chapter 6 goes through and says, here's how you pull the levers.
Yeah.
And my aspiration, because I was having really huge impact on people,
Yeah.
right? So working with families that are struggling, uh, working with, organizations that are struggling. Like I've had a number of situations where parents have come to me and said the relationship's broken forever with my kid. And within a couple of months, they come back and they say it's completely turned around.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Yeah. And so I was having that kind of impact, but it felt like I was dropping grains of sand in the ocean. And I need people to come alongside me and pick up great big rocks. And so that's why I wrote the book. I'm trying to spread the word as wide as I can. There's something we can do about it. Building trust is a skill that we can all get better at. And the book is an attempt to share that with the world.
Well, you got me sold. I'm gonna definitely that's be my next week's read after I get through this week's read. So it would be very applicable for just personal life, home life. But definitely it relates to business. I feel like by understanding the different areas of trust and how you could develop the trust, it's applicable on all three phases of operating and starting and operating this online coaching business, right? So if you talk
Absolutely.
about the client attraction side, the marketing side, well, by understanding their vulnerabilities and why they're not doing it or why they might want to do it, or by building trust with them, even just to get them to click and follow through, start following you, or even engaging with you initially, you have to develop a little bit of trust with that. So this book could be helpful on that degree with it.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just discussed all the different areas in the sales process of how obviously it's essential for them to be able. They're not going to buy from you a high ticket program if they don't trust you. So
Right.
if you haven't established at least the minimal amount of trust that's necessary, for them to make the transaction. And then obviously it
Yeah.
continues to be vital in the servicing of them, by them
Right.
to listen and follow your program. They have to believe in what you're saying, and the better that synergy is there in the servicing, the longer they're going to be a client of you. So I feel like there's a lot of very practical lessons in this book, and I'm excited to read it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just client retention, but referrals as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and the
Yeah.
referrals.
Yeah.
The
So
number
I think,
one source of in the PT world is referrals. So yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it has a huge relevance for your audience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this was really fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on here. I mean, this is very, very. I'm definitely going to read the book next week. I'm going to get it right now. I'm very interested in learning like different strategies for each of those 10 levers and see how it could help me in my life, whether it's managing my staff, my home life,
Right.
kids, but definitely with just in my coaching business. So 100%.
So my commitment to you is that if you reach out to me after you've read the book, we'll have another conversation and I'll
Absolutely.
answer any questions you have.
I will definitely do that. I'm gonna hold you to that.
Yeah.
How often do I get a
Integrity.
chance to re-interview the author after the book? That's so cool. I wish I could do that
Yeah.
all. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well,
So any
Darryl,
questions you have, and it doesn't have to be a podcast. It can just be you and me, whatever you want, buddy.
yeah, absolutely. That's cool. Well, thank you very much again. I appreciate you coming on, and hopefully you put the fires out up there in Canada. So
Working on it.
try to get that going. So, but yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
brother.
again. I really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.